In a routine ultrasound exam, a pregnant dog's stubborn refusal to give birth takes an unexpected and shocking twist. When the vet peers at the screen, what he sees is so alarming that he immediately calls the cops. What hidden secret in a seemingly natural process could prompt law enforcement to get involved? It began like any ordinary day at a quiet suburban veterinary clinic. The air was filled with the muted hum of conversation and the soft rustle of magazines in the waiting room. Dr. Samantha Cole, a seasoned veterinarian with a gentle demeanor and decades of experience, had seen it all, or so she thought. That morning, Mrs. Jenkins brought in Bella, a friendly but anxious stray dog who had been taken in by a local rescue group. Bella was visibly pregnant, and Mrs. Jenkins hoped that under Dr. Cole's care, she would soon give birth to a litter of healthy puppies. During the initial checkup, Bella's condition seemed routine, though there was an undercurrent of tension in her eyes that hinted at distress. With caring hands, Dr. Cole prepared to perform an ultrasound, a standard procedure to monitor Bella's progress. As the screen flickered to life, Dr. Cole's experienced gaze focused intently on the images unfolding before her. What should have been a straightforward glimpse of a canine pregnancy took an unexpected turn. Bella's belly, which should have shown clear evidence of developing puppies, instead revealed an image so bizarre and inexplicable that Dr. Cole's heart began to race. The ultrasound displayed unsettling shapes and shadows, features that defied the normal anatomy of a canine litter. Confusion quickly gave way to alarm. With every passing second, the images grew stranger, and Dr. Cole's mind raced. Had she encountered a rare medical anomaly, or was there something far more disturbing at play? Unsure and increasingly anxious, she stepped away from the console and reached for the phone. In that charged moment, with the ghostly images still pulsing on the screen, her professional instincts told her that this was not a case for a routine explanation. Within moments, the sound of the phone dialing echoed through the sterile exam room. Dr. Cole's trembling voice explained the situation to a colleague. And then, unable to shake the overwhelming sense of foreboding, she made a decision that would transform a normal day into a dramatic upheaval. She called the cops. As the sirens began to wail in the distance, the quiet clinic was suddenly transformed into a scene of uncertainty and suspense. What exactly had Bella been hiding, and how would this shocking discovery alter the lives of everyone involved? After the startling phone call and the flashing lights of the approaching police cars, the usually calm veterinary clinic was thrown into a state of uneasy chaos. Dr. Samantha Cole's mind raced as she tried to process the bizarre images still lingering on the ultrasound screen. The sterile exam room, with its antiseptic scent and quiet hum of machinery, now felt charged with a tension that was almost palpable. In the days that followed, the mystery surrounding Bella, the stray dog whose reluctant labor had upended a routine checkup, began to take shape, setting the stage for a series of events that would challenge everyone involved. At the center of it all was Bella, a gentle creature with soulful eyes that betrayed the weight of her predicament. Despite her advanced pregnancy, Bella had stubbornly refused to give birth, her body seemingly resisting the natural progression of labor. Mrs. Jenkins, who had rescued Bella from the streets and brought her to the clinic, watched on with growing worry and disbelief. Known for her soft-spoken compassion and determination to help every animal in need, Mrs. Jenkins had cared for Bella with tenderness and hope. Yet, as Bella continued to show no signs of labor, even after hours of monitoring, Mrs. Jenkins began to fear that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Cole, a veteran in her field with decades of experience, found herself confronting a scenario she had never imagined. The ultrasound images were confusing and deeply unsettling. Rather than the expected clear outlines of developing puppies, the screen displayed odd, shadowy figures and distorted structures that defied all known norms of canine anatomy. For a moment, she suspected a rare medical anomaly, but the more she studied the images, the more she felt a creeping sense of dread. What could be causing this mysterious resistance, and why was Bella's body refusing to follow nature's course? In an effort to bring order to the escalating situation, Dr. Cole decided to isolate Bella from the commotion. She gently reassured Mrs. Jenkins that she would do everything possible to understand the cause of Bella's distress. With practiced care, she explained the standard procedure for managing difficult births and the importance of ensuring the safety of both the mother and her unborn puppies. Yet, as she continued her examination, she could not shake the feeling that something was profoundly amiss. While the police arrived and began questioning the clinic staff about the unusual ultrasound findings, Dr. Cole reached out to her trusted colleague, Dr. Michael Alvarez, a specialist in veterinary pathology, to request a second opinion. Dr. Alvarez promised to visit the clinic as soon as possible, understanding that the case might hold clues to an unprecedented condition. Meanwhile, the tension in the clinic grew as whispers and uneasy glances filled the waiting area. Patients and staff alike were left to wonder what secret lay hidden behind Bella's resistance to giving birth. As the day wore on, Mrs. Jenkins recalled fragments of Bella's past, stories from the local animal shelter about how the dog had been found abandoned on a cold night, shivering and alone. Those recollections added a layer of poignancy to the unfolding drama. Had Bella endured a traumatic experience in her past that now affected her body's natural instincts? Was her refusal to give birth a protective mechanism born from years of neglect and hardship? These questions would later form the core of a broader investigation into the mysterious origins of Bella's condition. In the midst of all this uncertainty, community reactions began to surface. A local news crew, having caught wind of the incident through anxious whispers and social media buzz, arrived at the clinic to document the unfolding story. Their cameras captured candid moments. Mrs. Jenkins's tearful concern as she stroked Bella's matted fur, Dr. Cole's furrowed brow as she analyzed the perplexing ultrasound, and even the tense expressions of the police officers as they reviewed the evidence. The incident, which had begun as a routine checkup, was rapidly evolving into a story that gripped the hearts of everyone who heard it. As dusk fell, the atmosphere in the clinic remained somber, yet charged with determination. Dr. Cole prepared a detailed report, meticulously documenting every anomaly observed in the ultrasound and every step taken during Bella's examination. She knew that answers would not come easily, but she was resolute in her quest to understand the underlying cause of Bella's condition. Her professional duty, combined with an innate compassion for the suffering animal before her, spurred her on to seek further expertise. Meanwhile, Mrs. Jenkins, though heartbroken by the distress she saw in Bella, found solace in the small acts of kindness from the clinic staff and even from fellow pet owners who visited the waiting area. They shared stories of their own challenges and moments when their beloved animals had shown inexplicable behavior, a subtle reminder that sometimes nature's mysteries defy explanation. In those early hours of uncertainty, the foundation was laid for a deeper inquiry, a journey that would explore not only the medical oddities affecting Bella, but also the broader context of how trauma and neglect can alter an animal's instincts. Dr. Cole's call to the cops, driven by an unshakable gut feeling that something was wrong beyond a mere medical anomaly, set off a chain reaction that would soon bring in experts, law enforcement, and community support. The case of Bella was rapidly morphing into a multifaceted puzzle that demanded answers, promising revelations that would challenge conventional wisdom about canine behavior and maternal instincts. In the days following the unsettling morning at the clinic, as Dr. Samantha Cole and Dr. Michael Alvarez pored over the bizarre ultrasound images, a disturbing possibility began to take shape, a possibility that would upend everything they thought they knew about Bella's condition. One late afternoon, when the clinic was nearly empty and the fading light cast long shadows across the exam room, Dr. Alvarez sat alone with the ultrasound footage still playing on his monitor. His eyes, already tired from endless nights of work, suddenly widened as he noticed a recurring anomaly that he had almost missed in his initial review. At first, the strange shapes on the screen had been dismissed as artifacts, glitches or transient shadows that sometimes occur during imaging. However, as he rewound and replayed the footage, a chilling pattern emerged. There, embedded within Bella's uterus, was a series of small, highly defined and oddly angular structures. Unlike any normal fetal formation or typical scar tissue, These structures bore the unmistakable characteristics of foreign objects. Dr. Alvarez's mind raced. Could these be remnants of a surgical implant, or perhaps evidence of deliberate tampering? With a shaking hand, he called Dr. Cole over. "Sam, look at this," he said, pointing to the monitor. "These aren't natural. They're too precise, almost as if someone inserted them deliberately." Dr. Cole leaned in, her face growing pale as she scrutinized the images. The objects were scattered within the tissue, and their placement suggested they might have been used to interfere with Bella's natural birthing process. The realization struck them both like a bolt of lightning. Bella's refusal to give birth might not be a rare medical anomaly at all, but rather the result of deliberate, malicious interference. Unable to contain her alarm, Dr. Cole immediately documented her findings in meticulous detail. "I've never seen anything like this," she confided in a hushed tone. "It appears that someone has tampered with Bella's reproductive system. We might be looking at evidence of illegal breeding practices or even animal trafficking." The gravity of her words settled over the room as both doctors recognized that they were now entangled in something far darker than a routine case of dystocia. Soon, the police, who had initially been called due to the alarming images, returned to the clinic with forensic experts. As the investigation unfolded, Dr. Alvarez was asked to present his findings. With a mixture of professional detachment and personal outrage, he explained, "The ultrasound reveals foreign materials lodged within Bella's uterine wall. Their shape and positioning strongly suggest non-accidental trauma. This is not a congenital defect. It appears to be a deliberate suppression of the birthing process." His report, laden with medical jargon and raw emotion, sent shockwaves through the small community. Meanwhile, Mrs. Jenkins, who had lovingly cared for Bella, was overcome with a sense of betrayal. "How could someone do this to her?" she cried, her voice breaking as she recalled how Bella had been rescued from the streets. The revelation prompted a full-scale investigation into the facility from which Bella had originally been taken. Rumors began to circulate that the rundown shelter where Bella had spent her early days was a front for an illegal breeding ring, an operation designed to manipulate canine reproduction for profit. As the police dug deeper, testimonies started emerging from former employees of that facility. One tearful whistleblower recounted how animals were routinely subjected to invasive procedures without proper consent, their natural cycles being disrupted by chemical or mechanical means. "They treated the dogs like products," the witness whispered, "nothing more than tools to maximize profit." These accounts provided a grim context to Bella's condition, painting a picture of a criminal network that not only exploited animals, but also used sophisticated methods to ensure they could not reproduce naturally. In a tense press conference held at the clinic the following day, Dr. Cole and Dr. Alvarez faced a room full of reporters. Dr. Cole's voice trembled as she presented the findings. "We have documented clear evidence that Bella's condition is the result of deliberate tampering. This case goes beyond veterinary medicine. It is a call to action against those who would exploit innocent lives for gain." The revelation ignited public outrage and sparked calls for stricter oversight of animal breeding practices. Advocacy groups joined forces with law enforcement, demanding that the perpetrators be brought to justice. For the first time, the community realized that what had begun as a routine ultrasound had unraveled a sinister underbelly, a hidden world where vulnerable animals were being manipulated by criminal enterprises. The twist was shocking. Bella, the gentle stray who had refused to give birth, was not suffering from an inexplicable medical anomaly, but from a deliberate act of cruelty. The evidence was clear, and it marked the beginning of a broader investigation that promised to expose an entire network of illegal animal trafficking. As forensic tests were expedited and search warrants were executed, Dr. Alvarez and Dr. Cole vowed to continue their pursuit of truth, determined that Bella's suffering would not be in vain. The discovery of these foreign objects and the dark secrets they revealed had set in motion a chain of events that would challenge not only their professional acumen, but also the moral conscience of the entire community. The shocking revelation from the ultrasound had left everyone in the clinic reeling. In the sterile, quiet exam room, the gravity of what had been discovered slowly began to register on the faces of those present. Dr. Samantha Cole, and Dr. Michael Alvarez, still processing the evidence of deliberate tampering in Bella's reproductive tract, exchanged long, troubled glances. Their previous confidence had been replaced by an unsettling mix of professional disbelief and personal outrage. Dr. Cole, voice hushed yet trembling with emotion, confided to Dr. Alvarez as they gathered their notes later in the day, "I never imagined that someone could go so far as to interfere with a dog's natural process. Bella's suffering isn't a tragic accident, it's an act of cruelty. We have a duty to expose this." Her eyes, red from hours of study and sleepless worry, betrayed the deep personal impact the discovery was having on her. Dr. Alvarez nodded solemnly, adding, "This isn't just about medicine, it's about protecting the vulnerable. We must document every detail so that justice can be served, and no animal ever suffers like this again." Meanwhile, Mrs. Jenkins, the compassionate soul who had rescued Bella and cared for her as if she were her own, found herself overwhelmed by a mixture of despair and righteous anger. In the quiet corner of the waiting room, her hands trembled as she clutched a faded photograph of Bella in happier days. "How could someone do this to such a gentle creature?" she whispered to herself. Later, when a clinic nurse gently approached her, Mrs. Jenkins broke down in tears. "I saved Bella from the cold streets, and now to see her like this, it's heartbreaking." The nurse comforted her with soft words, assuring her that every effort would be made to uncover the truth. Mrs. Jenkins, however, could only shake her head in sorrow and resolve that she would not let Bella's pain go unanswered. Outside the clinic, the reverberations of the discovery began to stir the local community. The police, who had been initially called due to the alarming ultrasound findings, convened an impromptu press briefing in a nearby public space. Officer Daniels, a young but earnest member of the force, addressed reporters with a blend of clinical detachment and palpable concern. "Our preliminary investigation indicates that there is evidence of foreign objects within Bella's reproductive system, strongly suggesting non-accidental interference. We are treating this as a potential case of animal abuse and illegal tampering. We urge anyone with further information to come forward." His announcement, delivered in a measured tone, immediately set off a flurry of questions from the media, questions that hinted at a much larger network of cruelty lurking in the shadows of the local animal trade. Simultaneously, animal welfare advocates and local rescue organizations mobilized quickly. A representative from the regional animal rights group, Ms. Lacey, organized a meeting with other concerned citizens. In a small conference room at a community center, voices rose with indignation as they discussed the implications of Bella's case. "This case reveals not only one act of cruelty," Mrs. Lacey declared, "but possibly a systemic abuse within certain breeding facilities. We must act now to support Bella and every other animal who might be suffering behind closed doors." Her passionate speech galvanized the group, and plans were quickly made to initiate a community watchdog program that would monitor local breeding and shelter facilities. At the same time, local news crews had picked up on the story and began broadcasting live reports. In one such segment, reporter Angela Martinez interviewed a visibly shaken Dr. Cole in the clinic's corridor. "We're witnessing something unprecedented," Dr. Cole explained, her voice steadying as she recalled the disturbing images. "Bella's case is not just a medical anomaly, it's evidence of deliberate tampering. I hope our findings will lead to swift action against those responsible." Angela's on-camera delivery, mixed with clips of Bella resting uneasily in her recovery cage, brought a human face to the unfolding investigation, prompting many viewers to share the story on social media and demand justice. In the midst of the growing public outcry, even Dr. Alvarez found his professional resolve hardening. Over coffee in the break room, he and a few other colleagues discussed the broader implications. "We might be looking at an illegal breeding operation, or even a trafficking ring," one colleague speculated. "If Bella is just one of many victims, then we have a responsibility not just as vets, but as members of this community to help put an end to it." Their conversation, punctuated by moments of frustration and determination, reflected a collective commitment to not let Bella's suffering be in vain. Back at the clinic, as the day slowly turned into night, Dr. Cole stayed behind to review all the collected evidence. In a quiet, dimly lit office, she updated her detailed report and sent copies to both the police and local animal welfare organizations. Her fingers trembled as she typed, but her resolve grew stronger with every word she recorded. "I will not rest until every ounce of evidence is examined," she vowed softly. "Bella deserves justice, and every animal out there who has been exploited must be protected." By the end of the day, the initial shock had given way to a coordinated effort to confront the emerging crisis. Each character, the dedicated veterinarian, the heartbroken caretaker, the diligent police, the impassioned activists, and even the local media, had begun to adjust to the new reality. They were united by a shared purpose: to fight against the cruelty revealed by Bella's case and to ensure that no animal would ever have to endure such suffering again. In the midst of the mounting public outcry and the forensic investigation into Bella's disturbing condition, a series of unforeseen subplots began to unfold, adding layers of complexity to an already dire situation. As Dr. Cole and Dr. Alvarez continued to document their findings, whispers of deeper corruption emerged, not only within the breeding facility where Bella had been rescued, but also within the very community that now rallied for justice. One afternoon, while reviewing archived records in the quiet of her office, Dr. Cole received an anonymous envelope. Inside, she found a series of handwritten notes and dated photographs that hinted at the dark underbelly of a local animal breeding operation. The notes described clandestine meetings between unscrupulous breeders and even referenced Project Rebirth, a coded initiative that seemed aimed at manipulating the natural reproductive cycles of dogs for profit. The photos depicted a nondescript building on the city's outskirts, the same facility from which Bella had been rescued years earlier. Dr. Cole's hands trembled as she realized that this was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger systemic abuse that had likely claimed the lives and well-being of many vulnerable animals. As the gravity of this new information sank in, Dr. Cole found herself increasingly torn. On one hand, her duty was to protect and care for her patients. On the other, she was now drawn into a murky investigation that carried significant personal and professional risk. Late one night, as she was about to leave the clinic, her phone buzzed with an encrypted text message. "Stay quiet if you value your safety. They know you're asking questions." The chilling warning forced her to weigh the consequences of pursuing the truth even further. Yet, the sight of Bella's tortured eyes in the ultrasound replayed in her mind, and she knew that turning a blind eye was not an option. Meanwhile, the police investigation began to reveal cracks in the facade of the breeding facility. A key witness, a former employee known as Mr. Daniels, stepped forward with testimony that detailed forced breeding cycles, invasive procedures without anesthesia, and the use of unapproved chemicals to control a dog's reproductive cycle. However, before he could appear in court, Mr. Daniels vanished without a trace. His disappearance sent shockwaves through the local animal welfare community and raised fears that those responsible were willing to go to extreme lengths to cover up their crimes. Rumors swirled that Mr. Daniels had been threatened, and some whispered that even certain members of the local law enforcement might have ties to the illegal operation. At the same time, internal tensions began to simmer within the clinic itself. One of the veterinary technicians, Lisa, who had always been a quiet and diligent worker, started receiving anonymous phone calls late at night. The caller's voice was low and menacing, warning her to mind her own business regarding the ultrasound findings. Lisa, shaken by the encounter, confided in Dr. Cole, who immediately took steps to ensure that all staff members were briefed about the potential dangers of the investigation. Though most of the clinic team rallied behind Dr. Cole's determination to uncover the truth, a few were visibly anxious about the implications of challenging a well-connected criminal network. Beyond the walls of the clinic, the local community began to fracture over the revelations. While animal rights groups and social activists hailed the evidence as a breakthrough in the fight against animal exploitation, some local business leaders and a few political figures, wary of the scandal's potential to tarnish the city's reputation, started pushing for a rapid and perhaps hush-hush resolution. A prominent city council member, known for his conservative stance on urban development, was rumored to have been in contact with representatives from the breeding facility's criminal network. His subtle but consistent opposition to the investigation sowed seeds of doubt among some community members, complicating efforts to mobilize widespread support. Simultaneously, a local journalist from a rival news outlet began digging into the story. Unlike Sarah, whose empathetic reporting had rallied the community, this journalist's approach was more sensational. He published speculative articles that questioned the motives of the clinic staff, and even insinuated that Bella's condition might have been artificially induced as part of an experimental program. These pieces, though unverified, added another layer of chaos by polarizing public opinion and fueling mistrust between the investigative teams and certain segments of the community. Amid all these challenges, Mrs. Jenkins, who had cared for Bella with unwavering compassion, found herself caught between her love for the dog and the realization that she might have inadvertently been part of a larger criminal scheme. Late one evening, while comforting Bella in the back of the clinic, she began to cry softly, not only out of grief for the suffering she witnessed, but also from the overwhelming fear that justice might never be served. Her emotional breakdown, witnessed by a sympathetic nurse, underscored the human cost of the exploitation, a cost measured not only in physical suffering, but also in deep psychological scars. As the investigation broadened, a coalition of animal welfare advocates and concerned citizens formed an independent watchdog group. They organized clandestine meetings to coordinate with local law enforcement and to support potential whistleblowers like Mr. Daniels. Flyers were distributed, social media campaigns were launched, and public demonstrations were planned to pressure authorities into conducting a full, transparent inquiry into the breeding facility's operations. The community was now at a crossroads, facing not only the immediate threat of a corrupt criminal network, but also the risk that powerful interests would crush their burgeoning movement for justice. In this maelstrom of conflicting interests, internal fears, and external threats, the case of Bella had evolved from a single medical anomaly into a symbol of systemic abuse, a call to arms for every individual who believed that even the smallest act of cruelty must be exposed and eradicated. The stakes had grown higher than anyone had imagined, and the fight for truth was now a battle for the very soul of the community. In the aftermath of the shocking revelations, the clinic became a crucible of conflicting emotions, where every decision carried heavy consequences. Dr. Samantha Cole found herself caught in a turbulent inner struggle. Late one evening, after the police had left and the forensic team had been briefed, she remained alone in her office, the dim glow of the computer screen illuminating stacks of case notes and ultrasound images. Her mind raced with thoughts of Bella, the gentle dog who had been subjected to unthinkable cruelty, and the broader implications of what they had uncovered. In a moment of vulnerability, she picked up the phone and dialed her longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Alvarez. "Michael, I can't stop thinking about Bella," she confessed, her voice wavering with a mix of sorrow and determination. "Every time I look at those images, I see not just medical anomalies, but the haunting evidence of deliberate abuse. How do we even begin to fight something this monstrous?" Dr. Alvarez's response was measured but heavy with empathy. "Sam, I understand your pain. It's not just about medicine, it's about justice for those who cannot speak. But remember, we must tread carefully. The deeper we dig, the more dangerous this could become for all of us." His words lingered in the silence that followed, a stark reminder of the peril that lay ahead. Across the clinic, Mrs. Jenkins grappled with her own torment. The woman who had rescued Bella from the streets had long carried the scars of neglect and loss, and now the realization that the dog she loved had been subjected to such cruelty shattered her fragile hope. One quiet afternoon, as she sat in the waiting area cradling a worn photograph of Bella in happier days, she was approached by Lisa, a young veterinary technician whose gentle eyes betrayed a deep concern. "Mrs. Jenkins, are you all right?" Lisa asked softly, sitting down beside her. Tears welled in Mrs. Jenkins's eyes as she replied, "I don't know, dear. I feel so powerless, like I've failed Bella, and now all these questions about what happened to her. It's almost too much to bear. Lisa reached out and squeezed her hand, offering silent solidarity. Sometimes, caring means facing heartbreak head-on. We're all here with you, and we'll find a way to bring justice to Bella. You gave her love when no one else would, and that matters more than you know. Meanwhile, tensions outside the clinic continued to simmer. At a scheduled meeting with local animal welfare advocates, Dr. Cole was forced to confront the moral complexities of her involvement. In a cramped community room at the local library, voices overlapped in heated discussions. One activist, a seasoned member named Mr. Carter, demanded, "Doctor Cole, you must understand, the evidence we've uncovered isn't just a medical issue. It's a call to dismantle a corrupt system that preys on our most vulnerable." Dr. Cole's eyes, reflecting both professional rigor and deep compassion, met Mr. Carter's gaze. "I agree wholeheartedly," she said, "but I worry about the consequences. If we push too hard, we might endanger not only Bella but everyone connected to this case. How do we balance the need for justice with the safety of those who are already so fragile?" The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled over the group. A young volunteer, trembling slightly as he spoke, added, "We're caught between exposing a deep-seated corruption and protecting our community. I fear that if this goes public, those involved might silence us permanently." Dr. Coiltaways, sensing the collective anxiety, responded with quiet resolve. "I know it's a heavy burden. Every step we take carries risks. But if we allow cruelty to go unchallenged, then we have all failed these innocent lives. We must proceed carefully and united." That evening, as Dr. Cole left the meeting, she encountered Officer Daniels outside, a young cop who had shown genuine empathy during his earlier statements. "Dr. Cole, I just want you to know that while I have a job to do, I'm on your side," he said earnestly. "I believe in protecting those who can't protect themselves, and your findings, they're important. Just be cautious, all right?" Her heart warmed at his sincerity, even as she was reminded of the inherent danger in challenging powerful forces. As she walked away, she silently vowed that her commitment to Bella's case would not waver, even if it meant risking her own peace. Later that night, in the quiet corridors of the clinic, Lisa and another technician huddled together, discussing the anonymous threats that had been coming in. "I got another call last night, telling me to stop asking questions," one whispered. The fear in their voices was palpable, yet so was their determination. "We can't let them intimidate us," the other replied firmly. "Bella's suffering demands that we continue, no matter the cost." Their resolve, though laced with trepidation, reinforced a growing sentiment among the staff, that the pursuit of truth and justice was paramount, even if it meant stepping into dangerous territory. In these complex interactions, the heated debates with community activists, the quiet moments of shared grief between Mrs. Jenkins and Lisa, the solemn phone calls between Dr. Cole and Dr. Alvarez, and the encouraging words from Officer Daniels, a tapestry of emotional dilemmas emerged. Each character wrestled with fear, responsibility, and the deep desire to right a grievous wrong. They knew that the battle ahead would test not only their professional limits, but also the strength of their convictions and the bonds that held them together. In the wake of the emotional and moral turmoil that had engulfed the clinic and community, a new wave of uncertainty and dread began to seep into every corner of the investigation. Late one evening, as the clinic's fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the world outside was cloaked in darkness, Dr. Cole received a cryptic email. The message was brief, composed of only a few terse lines and no signature. "Stop digging into Bella's case, or the consequences will be severe. Not all secrets should see the light of day." The email's chilling tone sent a shiver down her spine. Dr. Cole, already burdened by the weight of Bella's ordeal, knew that this was no idle threat. It was a clear warning from someone who preferred the dark underbelly of the breeding operation remain hidden. Her hands shook as she printed out the email and tucked it into her case files, a grim reminder that the stakes were rising. At the same time, outside the clinic, the local police were busy following up on the new testimony from the former employee, Mr. Daniels. Rumors of forced breeding and illegal tampering were spreading like wildfire. Officer Daniels, the empathetic cop who had earlier offered Dr. Cole his support, was seen speaking with a pair of undercover detectives. "We're now tracking multiple leads," he confided quietly to a colleague in a hushed tone. "There's talk of a network that goes far beyond one facility. We might be dealing with a syndicate that has deep ties to animal trafficking, and they're not going to let us expose them without a fight." As these ominous hints of organized criminal activity began to surface, tension in the community grew palpably. Local animal rights groups, emboldened by the mounting evidence, organized a protest outside the clinic one frigid morning. Banners bearing messages like "Stop the Abuse" and "Justice for Bella" were held high as demonstrators gathered, their voices merging into a collective roar against the exploitation they now knew was hidden in plain sight. Among the crowd was Mrs. Jenkins, her tear-streaked face a mixture of heartbreak and fierce determination. "Bella didn't deserve this," she cried, her voice echoing with both sorrow and anger. "We must stand up for her, and for every animal who has suffered in silence." At the same time, Sarah's investigation took an unexpected turn. While reviewing additional documents obtained from anonymous sources, she discovered a series of encrypted files that mentioned a project referred to only as Project Rebirth. The files, when partially decrypted, hinted at the use of experimental methods to control canine reproduction. There were references to precision tampering and suppressing natural cycles, phrases that confirmed Dr. Alvarez's suspicions that Bella's condition was no accident. Intrigued and alarmed, Sarah arranged a secret meeting with her confidential informant, known only as Jake E. In a shadowed corner of a quiet, nearly deserted diner, Jay's voice was low and urgent. "Project Rebirth is real. They're using these methods on multiple animals. Bella is just one victim among many. If you dig deeper, you might find that this network reaches further than you ever imagined." Sarah recorded every word, her heart pounding with the realization that the case had grown into something far more sinister than a single act of cruelty. Meanwhile, inside the clinic, the atmosphere was charged with an undercurrent of fear. Dr. Cole's staff, already on edge from the earlier anonymous threats, began reporting odd occurrences. Lisa, the veterinary technician, confided in a hushed tone that she had seen an unfamiliar car idling outside the clinic late at night on more than one occasion. "I'm not sure if it's related, but it feels like someone is watching us," she admitted, her voice trembling as she recounted the details to a concerned colleague. The staff's apprehension grew, and the clinic's security measures were quietly beefed up. Cameras were adjusted, and access to sensitive areas was more strictly controlled. Simultaneously, during a heated meeting with local animal welfare advocates, a prominent community leader demanded, "We need answers. How many animals have been subjected to these inhumane practices? How deep does this corruption go?" The meeting was filled with impassioned voices, many of which now referenced Project Rebirth and the possibility of a vast criminal network operating under the guise of animal breeding. The more they talked, the more it became clear that Bella's case was merely the tip of an iceberg, a symbol of a systemic abuse that had been allowed to fester for far too long. As night deepened, the pressure of these revelations began to affect everyone involved. Dr. Coley, unable to shake the feeling of impending danger, stayed late into the night in her office, her mind swirling with the cryptic email and the implications of Project Rebirth. She began to draft a detailed report, outlining every anomaly, every threat, and every piece of evidence that pointed toward a coordinated criminal enterprise. Her hands moved quickly over the keyboard, fueled by a mixture of determination and dread. Across town, Sarah's latest investigative report was published online, her article exposing the initial signs of Project Rebirth and the disturbing methods employed by the breeding operation. The report quickly went viral, sparking outrage on social media and drawing the attention of regional news outlets. Calls for justice and demands for a full-scale investigation echoed throughout the digital sphere, and the pressure on local authorities intensified. In this crucible of escalating threats, community activism and investigative breakthroughs, every character in the story was forced to confront the terrifying possibility that the fight for justice was about to take a dangerous turn. The stray dog's silent, unwavering ritual, its daily journey to the sewer grate, had become more than a symbol of hope. It now served as a poignant reminder that, In a world where cruelty hides in shadows and corruption thrives in secrecy, even the smallest act of defiance could illuminate a path toward redemption. In the days that followed the explosive revelations and ominous warnings, the web of connections among the various players began to tighten, drawing new alliances and uncovering hidden subplots that intertwined the fates of everyone involved. Dr. Cole, still reeling from the disturbing evidence of deliberate tampering in Bella's reproductive system, found herself increasingly isolated, yet determined to push forward. Late one evening, as she reviewed case files and reread the anonymous email warning her to stay quiet, she realized that the investigation would demand more than just clinical expertise. It would require the solidarity of her entire community. Determined to forge those alliances, Dr. Cole reached out to several local groups. She contacted Ms. Lacey, the passionate representative of the regional animal rights organization, who had already been rallying support since news of Bella's case broke. During a quiet meeting at a community center, Ms. Lacey shared her insights. "We've uncovered disturbing patterns in several facilities around the region. Bella's case isn't isolated. It's a symptom of a larger problem. I believe that if we connect our findings, we can expose this network for what it is." Her words struck a chord with Dr. Cole, and together they began pooling their evidence with other local advocates. Meanwhile, Mrs. Jenkins, still heartbroken over Bella's suffering, found unexpected support from a group of former employees of the shelter where Bella had once been held. In a confidential meeting arranged by a trusted community mediator, these individuals, now willing to risk their safety, revealed that the facility had been part of an illicit breeding operation. One ex-employee, trembling as he recounted his story, said, "They used chemicals to control the dogs, even implanting foreign objects to suppress natural births. I never imagined our suffering would be commodified like that." His testimony provided a critical link to the encrypted files Sarah had uncovered regarding Project Rebirth, further solidifying the case against the criminal network. Sarah, whose investigative reports had already galvanized public sentiment, began collaborating with a small cadre of independent journalists and local bloggers. In a series of late-night strategy sessions held in a safe, undisclosed location, they mapped out the connections between the breeding facility, the mysterious emails, and even hints of involvement by mid-level officials in the city planning office. "We're piecing together a mosaic of corruption," one blogger noted. Every small detail, from suspicious financial transactions to the patterns of forced breeding, adds up to a larger picture of systemic abuse. This new collaborative effort not only bolstered Sarah's own reporting, but also linked her work with the efforts of Dr. Cole, Ms. Lacey, and other community advocates. At the same time, Officer Daniels, who had become a trusted ally within the police force, worked behind the scenes to connect the dots. Over a series of discreet meetings with undercover detectives and forensic specialists, he learned that several break-ins at local shelters had been orchestrated as intimidation tactics by the very network implicated in Bella's case. "There's a pattern here," he confided in a private conversation with Dr. Alvarez. "The same modus operandi appears in multiple cases. It seems they're trying to silence anyone who dares expose them." His determination to protect vulnerable animals and the community began to strengthen the bonds between law enforcement and local advocates. Adding another layer to the growing subplot, Marcus, the estranged relative who had slowly begun reconciling with Tommy, found himself thrust into the heart of the investigation. After receiving his own cryptic warning on an anonymous phone call, Marcus decided to share his experience with a local community forum. "I know I'm just one voice," he said in a tearful address, "but my family's story is part of this larger struggle. We have to hold those responsible accountable." His willingness to step forward helped humanize the issue for many residents who had previously viewed the case as just another isolated incident. During a community outreach event organized by Councilwoman Ramirez, where residents gathered to discuss next steps for protecting local heritage and vulnerable populations, the connections among all these disparate threads began to crystallize. In a heartfelt speech, Ramirez emphasized, "This is not just about one dog, one woman, or one shelter. It's about a network of exploitation that has been allowed to thrive in the shadows. We must unite veterinarians, activists, law enforcement, journalists, and community members to bring these injustices to light and ensure that our community stands together against cruelty. Her call to unity resonated deeply, and many in the crowd pledged to join the newly formed watchdog group dedicated to monitoring local breeding facilities and reporting any further abuse. As the community support network expanded, even the local businesses began to take notice. A small owner of a pet supply store, inspired by the growing movement, offered to donate a portion of his profits to help fund the independent investigation. "If we don't speak up for the voiceless, who will?" he remarked to a group of concerned citizens gathered in his store. This gesture, along with others, further demonstrated that the fight against exploitation had reached every level of the community. In the ensuing weeks, as evidence continued to mount and more testimonies came to light, the connections among all these individuals, Dr. Cole's unwavering commitment, Ms. Lacey's passionate advocacy, Sarah's investigative prowess, Officer Daniel's dedication, and the raw emotional journeys of Tommy, Marcus, and Mrs. Jenkins formed a tapestry of resistance. Their collective efforts not only began to expose the dark underbelly of Project Rebirth, but also fostered a sense of unity and shared purpose that promised to challenge the entrenched powers behind the illegal breeding operation. Each new revelation, every small act of solidarity, wove together the subplots into a single, powerful narrative that even in the face of systemic abuse and intimidation, a community united by compassion could shine a light on the darkest corners of corruption. The story of Bella, once a solitary tragedy, was now evolving into a beacon of hope, a call to action that demanded justice for all the voiceless victims of exploitation. Tensions that had been simmering for weeks finally erupted on a cold, overcast morning at the clinic. With mounting evidence of deliberate tampering in Bella's reproductive system and whispers of a widespread illegal breeding network, every stakeholder, veterinary staff, law enforcement, animal rights advocates, and local community members found themselves on the brink of an all-out confrontation. That morning, Dr. Samantha Cole arrived at the clinic to find the waiting area in an unusual state of disarray. Rumors had spread like wildfire. The local police were planning a major raid on the suspected breeding facility, and hostile forces behind Project Rebirth were rumored to be mobilizing to silence any further investigation. Dr. Cole's heart pounded as she reviewed the latest reports on her computer, which now included statements from undercover officers and corroborative testimonies from former employees of the breeding facility. Every new detail added to the sense of impending crisis. Outside the clinic, Officer Daniels and several detectives had gathered in a discreet parking lot. They exchanged hushed words and loaded their vehicles with additional surveillance equipment. "We've got credible leads now," Officer Daniels explained, his voice a mix of determination and caution. "Our intel suggests that the network behind these abuses is planning a coordinated effort to intimidate anyone who dares expose them further." His colleagues nodded gravely. The threat was no longer abstract, it was imminent. Back inside, Dr. Cole convened an emergency meeting with her team. With trembling hands, she presented the latest evidence, a detailed dossier compiled from forensic tests, encrypted emails, and the heartbreaking ultrasound images. "This isn't just a medical anomaly," she declared, her voice resonating with both sorrow and resolve. "Bella's condition is a direct result of deliberate intervention. We must be prepared for what comes next, both for her sake and for every animal at risk." Her words were met with anxious murmurs among the staff. Lisa, the veterinary technician, expressed her concern. "I've been getting those threatening calls too. I'm scared for all of us." The room fell silent as everyone realized that the danger was not confined to Bella alone. It extended to every person who sought the truth. Meanwhile, in the community, protests and public outcry had reached a fever pitch. A large crowd had gathered outside the clinic, waving banners and chanting slogans demanding justice for Bella and all the exploited animals. Among the demonstrators were several passionate animal rights activists and local residents who had come forward with their own stories of neglect and abuse by shady breeding operations. Their voices echoing down the streets turned the quiet morning into a cacophony of righteous anger and urgent demands for accountability. At a hastily organized press conference held in a nearby community center, Councilwoman Ramirez stood before a packed room of reporters and local citizens. "We can no longer stand by while our most vulnerable are exploited," she declared, her tone fierce and unwavering. "The evidence before us points to a systematic abuse, a network that has violated the trust and welfare of countless animals. We demand a full-scale investigation, and we will not rest until every perpetrator is brought to justice." Her words reverberated throughout the room, intensifying the collective resolve of those present. As the press conference unfolded, Sarah, now recognized as a leading investigative journalist on the case, released her latest report online. The article detailed every shocking revelation, from the foreign objects in Bella's uterus to the anonymous threats received by clinic staff. Within hours, her report had gone viral, igniting a firestorm of social media outrage and calls for immediate action. Comments poured in from across the region, urging authorities to shut down the breeding facility and implement stricter laws to protect animals from such cruel exploitation. In the midst of these escalating tensions, a pivotal moment arrived when Officer Daniels received an urgent call from his superiors. A warrant had been issued for a raid on the breeding facility, suspected of being the epicenter of Project Rebirth. The operation was scheduled to commence within hours. Officer Daniels briefed his team, "We're moving out soon. Our priority is to secure evidence and protect potential witnesses. We must be cautious. This network is dangerous and may not go down without a fight." Simultaneously, within the clinic, Dr. Cole gathered her staff for a final debriefing before the police raid. "We have to be ready for anything," she urged, her voice steady despite the palpable fear in the room. "Our duty is not only to Bella but to all the animals who have suffered. Let's ensure that every piece of evidence we've collected is secured and that our records are complete." The team worked frantically to organize files and preserve the ultrasound images, knowing that the coming hours could make all the difference. As the deadline for the raid approached, the atmosphere grew charged with both anticipation and dread. Outside, the sound of sirens and the murmur of a coordinated operation could be heard faintly in the distance. The community held its breath, united in the hope that the forthcoming actions would finally bring an end to the cruelty that had been uncovered. In that critical moment, when law enforcement, animal advocates, and the courageous staff of the clinic stood on the edge of a decisive operation, the stakes were clear. Bella's plight had ignited a struggle that went far beyond a single case of abuse. It had become a symbol of the battle between exploitation and compassion. The convergence of mounting evidence, public outrage, and a coordinated police operation set the stage for a confrontation that promised to expose the dark underbelly of the breeding network once and for all. As the police operation drew near, the atmosphere at the clinic and within the community grew unbearably tense. The scheduled raid on the breeding facility, the suspected epicenter of Project Rebirth, was imminent, and every moment felt charged with urgency and risk. In the sterile corridors of the clinic, Dr. Cole and her team raced against time to safeguard all the evidence they had painstakingly compiled. Files were double-checked. Digital images of Bella's ultrasound were backed up repeatedly, and every note was organized with the hope that nothing would be lost in the chaos that was about to unfold. Inside a cramped conference room in the clinic, Dr. Cole gathered her staff for one final, urgent briefing before the raid commenced. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor of adrenaline. "We have to secure everything. The ultrasound records, patient notes, even the confidential reports from our forensic team. Our duty is to ensure that every piece of evidence is preserved. Today, we're not just fighting for Bella, we're fighting for every animal who has suffered at the hands of this network." The staff, their faces a mixture of resolve and fear, nodded in unison. Lisa, the veterinary technician who had received those threatening calls, wiped away a tear as she murmured, "We can't let them win. Bella's pain, and the pain of so many others, must not be in vain." Meanwhile, outside the clinic, a palpable buzz enveloped the community. The news of the impending raid had spread quickly through local activist networks and social media channels. Animal rights groups, community organizers, and even concerned citizens had mobilized in support of the investigation. At a makeshift command center set up in the community center's parking lot, Councilwoman Ramirez coordinated with local leaders. With an unwavering tone, she addressed the gathered crowd. "We stand on the edge of a decisive moment. The evidence against these criminals is mounting, and we demand justice not only for Bella, but for every innocent life exploited by these operations. We will not allow profit and cruelty to eclipse compassion and justice." Her words, amplified by passionate chants and the clamor of supportive voices, helped galvanize the community. Among those present were longtime residents, local business owners, and even a few sympathetic city officials who had secretly joined the cause. The unity was evident, an unspoken promise that they would confront the forces of corruption head-on. At precisely the appointed hour, the sound of sirens shattered the tense calm. In a coordinated move, Officer Daniels led a squad of undercover officers and detectives toward the breeding facility. Meanwhile, a separate tactical unit was dispatched to secure the clinic and the surrounding areas, ensuring that all evidence remained intact and that any attempt at sabotage would be swiftly countered. Inside the breeding facility, an aging, nondescript warehouse on the city's outskirts, the atmosphere was chaotic. Under the cover of darkness, officers breached the building's perimeter. A tense standoff ensued as security personnel, likely part of the illicit network, scrambled to mount a defense. Shouts, the clatter of boots, and the hum of urgent commands filled the air. In one room, a group of individuals huddled together, their faces masked with fear and desperation, as they realized that the authorities had finally arrived. Back at the clinic, Dr. Cole received a call from Officer Daniels. His voice, steady yet urgent, relayed the first signs of success. "We've secured the facility and have found documents linking them to multiple illegal practices. We need your full report immediately." Dr. Coley, swallowing a lump of emotion, assured him, "I'll send everything over right away. Bella's case has opened a door to uncovering a much larger network. Please, keep us updated." The exchange underscored the high stakes. What had begun as a single case of abnormal canine reproduction had morphed into a full-blown investigation into systemic abuse. As the raid unfolded, tensions between the two opposing forces reached their peak. In the facility's main hall, a confrontation erupted between a mid-level manager and a lead detective. "You have no idea what you're meddling with," the manager screamed, while the detective retorted, "Your time is up. The evidence will speak for itself." Their heated exchange echoed through the building and was later captured on several body cameras, becoming a symbol of the inevitable clash between corruption and justice. Outside, as the police cleared the building and detained several suspects, community members gathered around the clinic, watching the events unfold on their smartphones. Social media lit up with live updates and impassioned messages of support for the ongoing investigation. The stray dog, now bandaged but resolute, made its way to its usual spot by the sewer grate. Its determined pace, undiminished by the chaos around it, symbolized the unyielding spirit of the community, a reminder that even in the midst of turmoil, hope and resilience persist. At the same time, Councilwoman Ramirez and other community leaders held an impromptu press conference near the clinic. "This raid is a turning point," she declared passionately. "Today we have shown that the voices of the community, of those who care about compassion and justice, cannot be silenced by the forces of greed. We will continue to fight until every perpetrator is held accountable." Her message resonated widely, drawing praise and solidarity from across the region. In that defining moment, as law enforcement secured the last of the evidence and the detained suspects were led away, Dr. Cole, Officer Daniels, and the entire clinic staff felt a mixture of relief and determination. The confrontation at the breeding facility had not only exposed a network of cruelty, but had also set in motion the possibility of lasting change. Every decision made during the raid, from the meticulous collection of evidence to the brave stand taken by community leaders, had pushed the investigation closer to its ultimate goal, to bring justice to Bella and to protect the vulnerable. In the aftermath of the intense raid, the air around the clinic and the breeding facility was thick with apprehension and unresolved fury. The successful seizure of crucial documents and evidence had sent shockwaves through the criminal network behind Project Rebirth, yet the final blow had not yet been delivered. Instead, a palpable uncertainty hovered over the community, as if every moment were charged with the possibility of another twist. The stakes had never been higher, and every character, veterinarians and law enforcement, community advocates, and even the quiet and determined stray dog, felt the weight of an impending reckoning. Inside the clinic, Dr. Samantha Cole gathered her exhausted staff in a dimly lit conference room. The walls, still echoing with the remnants of earlier confrontations, now bore silent witness to their collective anxiety. "We've come so far," she said, her voice a mix of exhaustion and resolute determination. "But I can't shake the feeling that this is just the beginning. The documents we seized indicate a deep-rooted network, one that has infiltrated not just animal breeding but even parts of our local administration." Her words, spoken with quiet urgency, underscored the precarious nature of their victory. Every piece of evidence now secured was both a triumph and a target, a double-edged sword that could expose the perpetrators, yet also provoke them to strike back. Outside, in the cold and restless night, community members huddled in small groups near the clinic and around the old facility. Councilwoman Ramirez, visibly burdened by the responsibility of leading her community through these tumultuous times, stood on a makeshift platform, assembled in a nearby parking lot. With the wind whipping through her hair and the murmur of anxious voices all around, she addressed the gathered crowd. "We have witnessed a horrifying abuse of power," she declared. "But tonight, we stand united. Our fight is not over until every last perpetrator is brought to justice, and every victim, no matter how small, is protected." Her call to unity and vigilance resonated deeply, echoing off cold concrete and sparking determined nods among the crowd. As the night deepened, Officer Daniels convened a strategic meeting with his team in a secure location near the scene. The room was sparse, lit only by the glow of computer screens and the soft hum of confidential communications. "Our intel confirms that the network is already reorganizing," Daniels reported in a low, urgent tone. "We intercepted chatter suggesting that those behind Project Rebirth plan a retaliatory move. We must be ready for any counteraction. Our next steps will be critical in ensuring that the evidence holds and that no further harm comes to anyone involved." His words underscored the precarious balance between their hard-won progress and the threat of a powerful, shadowy adversary. Meanwhile, Sarah, the intrepid investigative journalist, found herself at a crossroads. Her latest report on the raid and the emerging evidence had not only stirred public sentiment, but also attracted the attention of some very dangerous players. Late one night, as she reviewed a series of encrypted messages on her laptop, she discovered a new, ominous message. "You think you've won. This is only the beginning. Silence now, or suffer the consequences." The chilling warning sent a shudder down her spine. In that moment, the gravity of her work and its potential personal cost became undeniable. Yet, with her heart pounding, she resolved to continue exposing the truth, knowing that the story of Bella and the network of abuse had to be told, no matter the risk. In another part of town, Tommy and Marcus sat on a worn bench under a flickering streetlight near the now infamous sewer grate. The echoes of recent events still haunted them. Tommy, whose eyes had seen both despair and a glimmer of hope through the stray dog's unwavering ritual, clutched Marcus's hand tightly. "I'm scared, son," he admitted in a quivering voice. "I feel like we're standing on the edge of something much bigger than us, and I don't know if we're ready for what comes next." Marcus, looking into his father's tearful eyes, replied with quiet determination, "Dad, remember what the dog taught us. Even when the world seems cold and dark, there's always a spark of hope. We have to hold on to that hope, even if it means facing the worst of them." Their conversation, raw and intimate, set the tone for the personal battles that would define the coming hours. Back at the clinic, as the clock ticked toward midnight, the tension reached a fever pitch. Every member of the team, nurses, technicians, and even the administrative staff, felt the pressure of the impending retaliation. Dr. Cole-san, with her hands steady despite her inner turmoil, finalized her comprehensive report on Bella's case, knowing that this document could be the key to dismantling the entire criminal network. The ultrasound images, the forensic details, and the testimonies of former shelter employees were all meticulously compiled, each piece a testament to the cruelty they were determined to expose. In that charged atmosphere, every moment seemed to stretch out, heavy with both dread and determination. The stray dog, a silent witness to all that had transpired, limped to its usual spot by the sewer grate one last time before the final push. Its presence was a poignant reminder of the power of even the smallest act of defiance. As the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, every character, the brave and the vulnerable, the determined and the fearful, stood on the precipice of an irreversible moment. The battle for justice, for the protection of Bella and countless other voiceless victims, had reached its peak. Under the dark shroud of a stormy night, the moment of reckoning finally arrived. The police had amassed outside the notorious breeding facility, their sirens echoing through the empty industrial park as they prepared to execute the raid that would expose the full extent of Project Rebirth. Inside the facility, a dilapidated warehouse cloaked in shadows and secrets, the atmosphere was electric with tension and dread. For years, the dark underbelly of illegal animal breeding had thrived in silence, but now every suppressed injustice was poised to burst into the light. At exactly 5:45 a.m., the heavy wooden doors of the warehouse were forced open by a squad of tactical officers. The intrusion shattered the oppressive silence, and within seconds, chaos erupted. In the main hall, where dim lights barely illuminated rows of makeshift cages and disorganized stacks of paperwork, the ringleader, a gaunt man with eyes hardened by years of cruelty, looked up in alarm. "Freeze! You're under arrest," boomed an officer's voice, reverberating off the concrete walls. Before the man could muster a response, several officers swarmed him, their movements swift and resolute. In that charged moment, every piece of evidence that Dr. Cole and her colleagues had painstakingly gathered became a weapon against the corrupt network. Outside, onlookers gathered in droves as news cameras captured every moment of the unfolding drama. Councilwoman Ramirez, standing near the clinic where the investigation had begun, addressed the crowd with a voice full of determined passion. "Today, we reclaim our community. No longer will we tolerate the exploitation of our vulnerable. This raid is not just about one dog's suffering. It's about ending a cycle of cruelty that has haunted our streets for far too long." Her words, amplified by the live broadcast, resonated with the hundreds of residents who had come to witness the confrontation. Inside the warehouse, amid the shouts and clatter of the raid, a particularly harrowing scene unfolded. A group of frightened employees, coerced into silence for years, huddled in a corner. One of them, a young man whose eyes betrayed the pain of his forced complicity, could be heard sobbing softly as he confessed on camera, "I never wanted any of this. They made us do it. I was scared, and I had no choice." The raw, unfiltered emotion in his voice served as damning testimony to the systemic abuse that had been hidden behind closed doors. His confession, recorded by a determined undercover officer, was destined to become a cornerstone of the case against the breeding operation. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels, whose steady leadership had been a beacon throughout the investigation, coordinated with forensic experts inside a mobile command center. "We've secured the area," he reported, his tone both cautious and resolute, "and we're now collecting every document, every piece of digital evidence. This is the breakthrough we've been waiting for." His words punctuated the chaos as team members scoured the facility for any remnants of illegal activity. Among the recovered items were detailed records of forced breeding cycles, receipts for unapproved chemicals, and even a series of encrypted emails that referenced Project Rebirth in chilling detail. As the raid continued, the ringleader was led out in handcuffs, his defiant glare slowly giving way to resignation. In the midst of this dramatic scene, Dr. Cole stood near a window of the facility, her heart pounding as she watched the culmination of her relentless pursuit of the truth. Tears streamed down her face, not solely from sorrow for Bella's suffering, but from the bittersweet triumph that justice was finally being served. "Bella," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clamor, "your pain will not be in vain. Today we fight for all the voiceless." Her words, imbued with both grief and fierce determination, were captured by Sarah's camera and later broadcast to millions. Outside, the collective roar of the crowd merged with the fading sirens as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The stray dog, whose quiet, daily ritual had become a symbol of unwavering hope, emerged once again from the shadows near the sewer grate. Despite a freshly bandaged paw and the visible scars of past abuse, the dog limped with steadfast determination. Its silhouette, outlined against the soft glow of early morning light, became a living emblem of resistance, a poignant reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can ignite a revolution. In that climactic moment, as law enforcement secured the last of the incriminating evidence and detained several key players, the weight of systemic injustice was laid bare for all to see. Councilwoman Ramirez, speaking to a sea of tearful yet hopeful faces, declared, "We have shown today that when our community unites, no force of corruption can silence our demand for justice. This is our turning point, our victory over greed and cruelty." Her declaration was met with thunderous applause, and the energy in the crowd surged with renewed determination. For those who had been a part of the operation, the brave officers, the compassionate clinic staff, and the relentless advocates, and even the courageous stray dog, the night's events signified a hard-won triumph. It was a moment where the culmination of every risk taken, every act of defiance, and every plea for justice coalesced into one unforgettable, life-altering event. As the chaos subsided and the arrested criminals were led away, a collective sense of cautious optimism permeated the air. The raid had not only dismantled a network of exploitation, but had also sparked a movement that promised to protect the vulnerable from future abuse. In the soft glow of dawn, the community stood united, their hearts and minds forever changed by the events of that night. As the first light of a new day crept over the city, the once tumultuous events at the clinic and the dark corridors of the breeding facility began to settle into a fragile or hopeful calm. The raid had dismantled a critical part of the illicit network behind Project Rebirth, and the evidence collected promised that justice for Bella and for countless other exploited animals would soon be served. In the wake of the dramatic confrontation, the community, though still scarred by the events of the night, was beginning to heal, united by a shared sense of purpose and an unyielding demand for accountability. Dr. Samantha Cole, whose life had been irrevocably changed by Bella's suffering, now stood at the forefront of a movement to reform local animal welfare practices. In the quiet aftermath of the raid, she meticulously reviewed the final pieces of evidence, her hands steady even as her heart still pounded with lingering sorrow and resolve. "Bella's pain will not be forgotten," she whispered as she compiled her report, determined that every detail would serve as a catalyst for change. Her passion had ignited a spark, inspiring not only her colleagues at the clinic, but also law enforcement, community leaders, and concerned citizens to rally against cruelty. At the clinic, the atmosphere was somber yet resolute. The veterinary staff, who had faced anonymous threats and worked tirelessly under immense pressure, now shared moments of quiet camaraderie. Lisa, the young technician whose trembling voice had once revealed her fear, offered a small, brave smile as she gently patted Bella's head, now resting in a recovery area, surrounded by care and compassion. "We've done all we can," she said softly, "and now it's up to the system to ensure that no animal ever endures this kind of abuse again." Her words, simple yet sincere, reflected the collective hope that their efforts would pave the way for lasting reforms. Mrs. Jenkins, the compassionate soul who had rescued Bella from the streets, now found solace in the community's response. No longer an isolated figure burdened by sorrow, she was embraced by neighbors and activists alike, all of whom had rallied behind the case. At a small memorial gathering organized by local animal rights groups, she shared tearful memories of the dog she once knew, a gentle, loving creature whose suffering had been at the heart of a vast, sinister network. "Bella was a symbol of hope," she said, her voice trembling yet strong. "Her courage in the face of unimaginable cruelty reminds us that every act of kindness matters. We must honor her memory by ensuring that justice prevails." In parallel, community leaders like Councilwoman Ramirez continued their work with renewed vigor. The temporary injunction on the redevelopment project had not only halted the immediate threat, but had also sparked a broader movement. At a press conference held in the refurbished community center, Ramirez addressed a sea of determined faces. Today we have shown that our community will not stand by while exploitation and cruelty go unchallenged, she declared. We are taking concrete steps to overhaul local animal welfare laws and to ensure that facilities like the one that harmed Bella are permanently shut down or reformed. Our fight is not over, but every victory, no matter how small, brings us closer to a safer, kinder future. Officer Daniels, whose unwavering dedication had been a linchpin throughout the operation, also reflected on the events. In a quiet moment at the precinct, he reviewed the case files and the evidence secured during the raid. "We've exposed a dark chapter," he said quietly to a colleague, "but this is only the beginning of a much larger effort to protect those who cannot protect themselves." His commitment to follow the investigation through every twist and turn served as a reminder that even in the darkest corners, the pursuit of justice remains vital. As the days passed, Sarah's groundbreaking investigative reports continued to gain traction online and in regional news outlets. Her articles, rich with vivid details and emotional testimonies, not only informed the public, but also inspired community action. Her work had become a rallying cry, a testament to the power of persistent journalism in holding the powerful accountable and in giving voice to the voiceless. Now, as the community slowly began to rebuild and the promise of legal reform emerged, a quiet transformation took hold. Bella's story, once shrouded in mystery and pain, had become a symbol of collective resilience. The stray dog's journey, the bravery of Dr. Cole and her team, and the relentless determination of every individual involved had forged a legacy of compassion that would not be easily forgotten. Before you go, we invite you to join us in this movement for justice and compassion. If Bella's story has touched your heart and reminded you that every act of kindness can spark monumental change, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know how compassion has impacted your life and what steps you believe communities should take to protect the vulnerable. And don't forget to watch our next video, where we follow the next chapter of this journey, detailing how local reforms and community efforts are transforming the landscape of animal welfare. Together, we can keep the flame of hope burning bright and ensure that no act of cruelty goes unnoticed. Every subscription, every share, and every comment makes a difference. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay kind, stay compassionate, and let's continue to fight for a better world, one life at a time.